Hey guys, how's it going? Kripp here, and it is time for another Whispers of the Old Gods card review. This is number 3. They're gonna keep coming. I'm kind of doing them around the 15 card mark as the cards are coming out pretty regularly, and it's pretty interesting to see how the cards develop and how the set, really appears as a whole. This week we got Mark of Yasharj. I think that's how it's pronounced, but again, pronunciation's pretty crazy difficult in this expansion. And this is one of the best cards that I've seen out of the set so far. It is a druid card, of course. It's a 2-mana spell. Give a minion +2/+2, and if it's a beast, draw a card. Now, this is really, really powerful. Now, there's not a lot of people that have played with a card like this, but as an arena player, I have played with a lot of cards like this. I've played with lots of Mark of the Wild in Arena. And Mark of the Wild, usually the effect just gives you the stats. The aspect of it giving taunt is actually not very relevant in Arena. In Constructed, you would normally use like the taunt aspect of Mark of the Wild to just buff up a really big minion, often a giant, just to prevent yourself from dying. And, in the more like Zooey decks, it's just a card that doesn't really cut it. Mark of Yasharj is a lot like Mark of the Wild in the early game, where the taunt aspect doesn't matter. You just want that extra health bonus, and the attack bonus, because you traded for free, basically. Like, you play this on your 3/3 minion, and then you kill your opponent's 3/3 minion, and you're left with like a 5/2 minion, and that's a really powerful effect in its own. But because Mark of Yasharj gives attack as well, unlike some of the other buffs in the early game, it also threatens the next card to be played. So it has a really powerful effect, and just 2 for +2/+2 is pretty good. But the fact that you might get a card out of it if you play it on a beast is huge. Not only just because you can draw a card, you can kind of make a beast deck, but just a lot of the beasts that are still left in the standard format are just going to be some of the standard druid cards. You have a lot of really powerful beasts. You have cards like the Raptor, the 3-mana king these days, in standard at least, and then you're going to have the a Savage Combatant, and these are both cards that you can very easily manipulate the game with, so very, very powerful effect. One of the best cards in the set so far. And we had Infest for Hunters. Infest is a very interesting card. It acts with mostly Unleash is what I can come up with. Now, yeah, you can build like a big board as a hunter, but I kind of doubt that a lot of the Zooey type of decks with a bunch of small death rattling minions is going to work in the standard format. But yeah, if you're playing Arena, if you're playing Wild, it might do just that. I just don't know how good it is, because in those formats, being aggressive is often more important than generating value. But the way that I see Infest working in every format is comboing with Unleash the Hounds. Basically, you let your opponent build a board, you get to like 4 or 5 minions, you play Unleash, then you play Infest, and if you have some like beast buff or minion attack buff or something like that, that would basically be like the dream. You reload your hand completely. It has the same effect as the old draw mechanics in the very broken hunter decks, so it has a lot of potential. Now, will that type of hunter deck work against the control decks? Yeah, it might. A lot of the mid-range hunter power comes from the classic set, and the mid-range hunter does actually do pretty well against most control decks, as the pressure does mount pretty heavily before the control decks can take control. Then we have Kabbalist's Tome. This is a very interesting card. When I first looked at the card, I'm like, wow, that's totally broken. I'm totally going to make a Fatigue Mage, because Fatigue Mage is almost a good deck already. I mean, it kind of is a good deck already. And then this card is just insane in it. You'd want to use this card not in like a Tempo Mage, not in the kind of just, like if you're playing an aggressive deck, it is more efficient to just draw cards. But if you're playing a controller or fatigue deck, you want to keep as many cards in your deck. You want to generate cards, and usually in those decks, because you're running board clears and combo win situations, generating cards is just going to be a lot better, especially when you have the board clears and you can afford to just waste the turn to spend 5 mana to generate 3 more. Now, the issue that I didn't really understand when I first looked at the card is that a lot of the cards that create this archetype, this Fatigue Mage archetype, are going away, unfortunately. So cards like Duplicate is going away with Standard. Cards like Echo of Medivh, that's going away with Standard. So Kabbalist's Tome, I think it's still pretty good. I think it's kind of like the replacement for those cards, so people can still play a Fatigue Mage if they choose, but it will be pretty tricky because a lot of the staples are going away. As far as the wild format, I have my doubts that Fatigue decks will be able to keep up with the aggro decks, as I believe the aggro decks will get more and more powerful, while the control cards seem to be on a pretty standard power level. We have Steward of the Darkshire. This is a really powerful card. This is like really, really powerful. Some people look at this card and they compare it to like Hobgoblin, but it's not the same effect. Hobgoblin works with played cards, and the Steward of Darkshire works with summoned cards. Summoned cards are cards that you can generate through battle cries, through hero powers, while played cards, you have to play them from your hand. And the distinction is a really big one, particularly because it's a paladin card, particularly because it has synergy with the hero power. So if you play Steward of the Darkshire and you just use your hero power to get a 1/1 guy, that 1/1 guy will get a Divine Shield. And yeah, that's a pretty big deal. There are a lot of 1 health minions that are really not too bad. There's also a lot of cards that Paladin has that generates a bunch of minions. There's like token stuff, and I feel like all that might play in together. I don't know if this card will really dominate the game because there's a lot of anti-aggressive tools put into the Old God set, but it seems like it might have a good impact, and it seems like it'll have an impact in the existing decks that will then be moved into the wild format. We have Vilefin Inquisitor, the Murloc that's been released so far. Well, I think a lot of people were expecting something else for Murlocs. They like to see the buffs and stuff, but this is a pretty cool Murloc still. It's a Paladin-only Murloc, which is a bit unfortunate for the other classes trying to make Murloc decks, and it converts your hero power into summoning a 1/1 Murloc. So this would replace summoning a 1/1 guy. And the fact that it's a Murloc rather than a Silverhand Recruit, it loses some synergy, but it gains a hell of a lot more synergy. You'd be playing this card generally in the constructed format if you're playing Murloc decks, and Murloc decks have a lot of buffs with the other Murlocs. So it basically makes your hero power a lot more valuable for that type of archetype. Now, is playing a Murloc deck in constructed a good idea? We'll see. And we have Ragnaros the Light Lord. Now, I first saw this card, I honestly thought it was fake. I'm like, really? Ragnaros? Again? And the Light Lord? Well, whatever. I don't really care about the lore that much. I like to see Ragnaros. He has a cool sound effect, and hopefully that delivers on this card as well. This card is actually very strong. It is much like a lot of the other cards in the set, much like a lot of the other cards even in this review. The playability does kind of have a huge effect based on what happens with BGH. Blizzard has not announced the nerfs yet. BGH is a very good candidate to be nerfed, but we don't know for sure. And if BGH doesn't get nerfed, a lot of these cards that, a lot of us are going to say are pretty good, this and that, are just going to be hard countered. It really does base on that. It's kind of a cheesy way to analyze a card, but BGH is so ridiculously broken in this regard that you don't have too much of a choice but to really, have that disclaimer in there every single card over 7 attack. Regardless, Ragnaros the Light Lord has an effect when you play him. It is an end of turn effect. It is the opposite of the normal Ragnaros. He heals a damaged friendly character. Now, the damaged operative word is a very important one because he doesn't just heal a random character, as probably a lot of your character is going to be on full health. And another distinction is that this Ragnaros can attack. And because he can attack, and because he heals a damaged friendly character, which could be himself, he's a friendly character. So basically you can just win the game just from this guy, and that is a very important aspect. This guy will probably be very good against some of the spell combo decks that don't quite do the full 30 damage, so it'll probably be very good against like Freeze Mage, and I think it'll generally just be quite good. The fact that it's an end of turn effect, you can attack and manipulate the creatures, so like if you have a few injured minions, you can deliberately kill them off, even in unfavorable situations, to basically guide the healed missile as you wish, and I think you'll be able to do that with a reasonable level of reliability. So I think the card is really good as a result. We have Shadow Word Horror. Priest card, destroy all minions with 2 or less attack. Now, there's a lot of people who are really excited about this card, but I think I'm going to be the downer here. That I have to say, I don't think this card is ever going to be, like, too good. It might be a pretty good card, but it is only going to be a good card if Priest sucks. So my reasoning is that it's such a polarizing effect that, you know, if Zoo decks are really that dominant, this would just murder all of them. So nobody will play Zoo, so then this card will suck again. You know, it's just too polarizing to be a staple in any deck. 2 versus 3 attack is a big distinction. It's really nice if it works, but that's really where I'm going to stop the card. Yes, it's amazing if it works, but if it works is really where you have to just cut off the card. It's just not going to be that good, because if it's that good, then nobody's going to play Zoo decks, right? So the only reason it might be decent is if Priest is otherwise a really bad class and doesn't win against like anything, and Zoo is a deck, then Priest will be like the Zoo counter. But you can basically already make a Zoo counter for Priest. So it's a really good card, but I just don't see it actually fitting particularly well. It just might be a one of in most Priest decks, and it kills like 1 or 2 minions. You know, just kind of like a whatever card. Thing from Below. This is the first of the 2 Shaman cards released this week, and this is a big deal. Shaman's getting some of the craziest cards we've ever seen, and it should be interesting, as Shamans mostly have their strength in the TGT set and in the base set, both of which will be in the standard format. So keep that in mind. It really does seem like Shaman might be the next big class for control and mid-range, and maybe even aggro in the upcoming expansion. Thing from Below is a pretty powerful card. It costs 1 less for each totem you've summoned. Summon totems are ones off of hero powers, off of like triggers, off of like cards, like, you know, Totem Golem is a totem that you can summon, and all of those things will reduce the cost by 1, and it is an effect that will be permanent throughout the game. So if you draw this and you've played like 6 of the totems beforehand in the game, without it being in your hand during that time, you'll still be able to play it for 0. So it has some really powerful late game potential, but I have to say that the card is still fairly balanced, because a lot of the late game decks do have some very cheesy combos. This is just a pretty cheesy card, pretty overpowered card in the late game, but in the early game you're really not all that likely to play many totems before like turn 4 or 5. So like, yeah, you might play this on turn 5, 5 mana, 5/5 taunt with 1 totem. That's like not, that's fit. That's like kind of crappy actually. You might play it on turn 4 if you played 2 totems, but I think that will be pretty unlikely, and a 4 mana 5/5 taunt really won't break the game or anything. At that stage, if you're playing against an aggro deck, the fact that it's a 5/5 rather than like a 2/5 taunt is basically like the same thing at that stage in the game when you actually need it. So I don't think the card is overpowered. I think it's just pretty balanced, and it's just pretty good. I don't know if Shamans will need more taunt minions, but if they do, they're going to look to this one in their next expansion. And then this card is one that I think I'm most excited about in the expansion so far, is the Master of Evolution. The Recombobulator is alive, and it is a Shaman card. It's a 4 mana 4/5, so you basically have just solid hard stats on the card itself, and the battle cry transforms a friendly minion to one that costs 1 more. That is a really powerful effect. Recombobulator is already a pretty good card, even though cards you put in your deck, when you transform into the same card of that same mana cost, or a different card of the same mana cost, you're usually downgrading the card, but that's not always the case because of battlecry effects. A lot of minions have a lot of their stat value, or mana cost, into their battlecry effect. So when you use the battlecry and you have like a poor body for a high mana cost, cards like Master of Evolution are insane. They're also very powerful when it comes to trading. If you have like a 6/6 minion and your opponent has like a 5/6 minion, he's playing a mage, you know, you trade and then the mage pings your dude, and then it's kind of a 1-for-1. You don't feel too great about that. But this guy has the effect of healing. So you attack your 6/6 minion, you kill the 5/6, and then you transform your minion to one that's a little bit higher. You might get a ridiculous card, but even if you don't, you basically still get value out of a card that wouldn't otherwise get it. And because there's basically no cost to this card, it's a 4 mana 4/5. Even if it does nothing, it's going to be spectacular. So Master of Evolution really seems to be like one of the added staples to the Shaman arsenal. And we have Apothecary. kind of a strange heal card. I really doubt that too many aggressive decks will be very rampant, and I do think this guy will really suck against control, so I don't know how valuable it will be in Constructed. I would say probably not that valuable, but again, it is a heal card, and almost all heal cards throughout the history of Hearthstone have been very powerful at some point in time. So I'll probably eat my words there. It'll probably be a pretty decent card. I think most of the application for this card is in Arena. In Arena, you always need a little bit of healing. You always need a little bit more, and you don't really pay as high of a price as you do for some of the other heal effects. It's still a 5-mana 4/4 body. That is a really big deal. So this is quite a good arena card, but it doesn't fit every arena deck. If you're playing a very aggressive deck, you're trying to just tempo out your opponent, this card is not going to work very well with your deck. So it is a powerful card, but it is mostly going to be for the arena decks that are already very good or contain a lot of board clears already. Next up, we have the Skyrim Cultists, the 6-mana 7/6 Battlecry. Give your Cthulhu +2/2 wherever it is. Man, Cthulhu deck's gonna have to be pretty good for this card to see play. I'm kind of puzzled why it is a rare. Generally, the mediocre kind of crappy cards, you'd see them in the common slot, so it is a bit strange to me. The existence of this card kind of suggests that Big Game Hunter will be nerfed, because otherwise it would just be too horrible, but we've already seen some really horrible cards in Whispers of the Old Gods expansion, so it might just be another one of those. But if BGH does get nerfed and Cthulhu decks are really powerful and there's a lot of serious synergy with the Cthulhu and all that kind of stuff, and there seems to be so far, maybe we'll see a few oddball decks that includes this card. And we have Scaled Nightmare, the dragon of the set so far, 6-mana 2/8, and at the start of your turn you double this minion's attack. That is a lot to pay for 6 mana. This is the type of card that is really powerful if you can get out of control, but there's just so many cards that have that effect. There's so many cards that if you're already winning and your opponent has no answer, and you play this on 6 mana, you can win the game. There are a lot of cards that do that. So will this really add to that pool significantly? Probably not. I do see Scaled Nightmare being very powerful with specific buffs, but that's really about it. If you can give it an attack buff or a health buff, or somehow you can make it just not die, you get the effect once, maybe twice, you're looking at a decent card, but in general, it looks pretty weak. Then we have Ancient Harbinger. Again, probably mispronounced that one. It's a 6-mana 4/6, and at the start of your turn, put a 10-cost minion from your hand into your deck. That's pretty strong effect, but it at the start of your turn, so it has to be played, then it's your opponent's turn, then your opponent has to not kill it, and then the effect triggers, and then you can play your 10-drop. So right now, there's not that many 10-drops in the game. There's going to be a lot more added in the expansion, but a lot of them don't have too many immediate effects outside of Cthulhu from what we've seen so far. So, the effect might not be as powerful as it suggests, but it's still a pretty powerful effect. Now, let's consider that the effect is really good. What is the likelihood that a card like this will actually work? So, I would argue this card just won't really work all that well. And the reason I think that is because, if your opponent does actually respect the fact that a 10-drop will, cause him to lose the game, he's just going to kill the card. So in that case, it's just going to be like a 6-mana 4/6 taunt. Is that good? Not really. And in the other case, if your opponent thinks that he can just set up a 2-turn lethal, there's only a very limited number of 10-drops that he has to consider. If you've played a lot of Cthulhu cards, you can be like, oh yeah, I might die to Cthulhu, I'll kill the card. But if you play no Cthulhu cards, you might be like, yeah, I'm not really scared of any 10-drop, I can just go for a 2-turn lethal situation, and in that case, it's actually worse than a 6-mana 4/6 taunt. So it can be a really good card. It can be that card that sticks on the board, pulls 3 10-drops out of your deck if you're even running that many. But in general, it seems like it's going to really come a bit short of expectations. And then, you might be thinking, what 10-drops are there available? We have Yasharj Rage Unbound. This is another old god that was announced this week. It's an okay one. All of them are cost 10 mana. so far. This one's a 10-10, so it has some pretty high base stats. At the end of your turn, put a minion from your deck into the battlefield. So a lot of people talked about how this card is really bad, and I will admit it's not great. But I think, some decks can maybe see some use of this card. A lot of people compared Yasharj to Varian, but I think that is an unfair comparison. For one, Varian is just 7-7 stats. This is 10-10. That is a pretty big difference, in fact. And Varian works best when you just have a high number of minions in your deck. But if you have a high number of minions in your deck, most of them just can't be that very high mana cost. So the expected minion, even if you have a lot of them, is going to be like a 3 mana guy, maybe a 4 mana guy. So Varian's going to get a decent amount of value, but it's just going to happen once. It's just going to be a bit inconsistent, and you're generally going to get some weak stuff. With Yasharj, it works best when you have few minions in your deck. So you'd play probably like a spell-heavy control deck. You'd include Yasharj and, maybe 3 or 4 other just huge minions that you would very much welcome to have brought at the end of your turn from the Yasharj. Now, Yasharj won't reactivate the end of turn phase, so if you get something like a Ragnaros, it won't trigger the Ragnaros' ability, so you kind of have to keep that in mind. Because of that case, it probably works best with just huge taunt minions, and huge taunt minions tend to work alright with controlled spell-heavy decks. So that's why I think it's not like a hopeless card. And I think some people just see it as that. So there's some merit to it. I also want to mention that in Arena, this guy will probably be one of the best legendaries in the game, just because it's often really difficult to kill at 10-10. That's about it. It's really hard to kill at 10-10. If it triggers twice, there's no chance you're winning the game. So it's pretty good. And the last card for this week is Mukla, Tyrant of the Veil, a 6-mana 5/5 beast, and the battle cry adds 2 bananas to your hand. Now, compared to the Mukla that we've played so far, the King Mukla, it's a 3 mana cost difference, and instead of giving your opponent 2 bananas, you take the 2 bananas. Is that worth it? Well, initially you'd think no. It's like a 6-mana 5/5, that sucks ass. But I'm actually a person who played a lot of King Mukla, and when you play King Mukla, you realize how powerful of an effect you're giving your opponent. You're basically giving your opponent, throughout the rest of the game, potentially 2 free chances to trade up on your board. Is that worth like 1.5 mana, which is basically what you're reducing this card by? Yes. Yes, that is worth it. That is really, really worth it. I think Mukla Tyrant of the Veil will fit into a lot of mid-range decks. It might even fit into a lot of Zoo decks. And it obviously work a little bit better in some of the spell synergistic, generally mage decks. But those lists, I think, are more reliant on the cards having immediate effect. So even though there's added synergy in some of the mage cards, I do think that this card will more likely see play in the more aggressive mid-range decks. I think it's overall just a good, solid card. And yeah, I think if you try it, you'll agree. That's it for this week, guys. I hope you guys have enjoyed my review. And overall, the cards coming out, they're very interesting. It's important to realize that with GVG, with Naxxramas, both these sets going out, the standard format, the power levels are really kind of like flatlined. I think the Old Gods cards are in line with like TGT and the Classic set, which is overall a really good thing. I think we're going to see a mix of a lot of viable decks, and mostly on a very similar power level. Should be a great time to play Hearthstone, and yeah, hope you guys check it out. For now, I'll see you guys tomorrow.